Alright guys, today we're going to do some tweeter experiments and checking tweeter placement and positioning and how it sounds different with all else being the same. Start the track. Okay, so right now the tweeter is on about 45-ish degree angle, and with this hard surface behind it and a pretty hard surface down here. Now we're going to pretend this is a windshield, right? Let me go ahead and I'm going to set the volume a little higher. Alright, so here we go. We're going to leave the volume there from now on. This is about the rake of a normal window. Alright. Now let's put it in a flat situation. Actually, yeah, pretty close to being 90 degrees there. We're going to bounce it off the windshield now. What I'm hearing is that snare increases. It sounds more focused. That is interesting. We're going to fire it at a very steep angle, almost vertical now, okay? So it's almost pointed below the camera. I might have to move the windshield back just a little bit. It doesn't really change much. No, doesn't change near as much, but it's firing up or slightly toward the windshield just a little bit. It gets a much more focused sound. It's like there's no echo. That's the best way to explain it. It's like when it's tilted back like this, there's nothing there. I hear echoes. I hear roominess. As it tilts back like this, the echoes all go away. Huh. That is interesting. Let's try something else. We're going to stick this tweeter down inside here and we're going to fire it straight up. Just curious as to what that's going to do. So the tweeter is firing up out of this hole, so you're getting all reflected sound at this point. I'm just curious to see how that plays out. Right away, what I notice is the snare is subdued. The highs are getting out, but the lower part of the high is getting severely dampened. Did the snare increase? snare rolls off. Maybe an idea for a way to subdue the lower parts of the tweeter. Let's add this windshield to it now and see what happens. Oh wow. Well, that's got a nice click to it. That really brings out the twinkle in the tweeter and subdues the snare completely. Wow. At 45 degrees, it doesn't really, kind of reduces it, but whenever you're up just a little bit, yeah. Of course, it has to do with my head, where my head is at, so that's interesting though. So possibly mounting tweeters down in a suppression like this and then having the windshield reflect them is a good thing for a natural roll-off from the lower parts of that.
All right, guys, let's talk about what we learned, because I suspected it was going to be interesting, but I was kind of impressed with how interesting it got. Um, Number one, I noticed the Doppler effect in play, which is odd because, man, highs behave so weirdly. Uh, Lower frequencies are much easier to predict and control, but high frequencies are they're just so different. The Doppler effect is when you have like a vehicle pass you. As it's moving closer to you and moving toward you, the frequency of the sound is actually getting boosted higher because it's moving and it's producing the sound. But as it passes you, now the source of the sound is moving away from you. So the frequency that you're hearing, the same note, is perceived from your position as being a lower note. It's kind of like a right. The faster it's going, interestingly enough, when it does this, the more that pitch changes. So a slow vehicle might be like, whereas a real fast one would be like, right? Because again, it's moving away, therefore it's perceived as a lower frequency. It's moving toward you is perceived as a higher frequency. This is how one of the ways that scientists can tell where the origin of a light is, or whether a body is moving away, it's producing the light, or coming toward you, it's producing the light. They can position things in the sky based on that red-blue shift. All of these things are part of the same phenomenon. Okay, they're not all connected in a lot of ways. They're all different, but they're all part of the same phenomenon. Something's moving toward you, you're going to perceive the effects of it differently than something that's moving away from you. Now, back to the tweeter. As the windshield, or the artificial windshield, is moved down into position, you start to hear the sound change. And this is the part I don't quite understand.
We're still at the same volume. I just got the driver sitting on top of the block now.
I'm going to have to do some thinking about that, because I guess it's because whenever it's up, the sound is getting reflected off of the ceiling and coming back down, which makes it further away. And then as it moves down into position, it's going to be getting reflected straight into your ears, more, yeah, I don't know. Um, I do know that it's a vastly different situation as that reflective surface changes angles. This is going to affect any tweeter you place up there on the dashboard as well, because depending on what angle that windshield is going to dictate how that sound is going to behave when it bounces off of it. And I'm guessing ideally you're wanting the sound to be directly reflected and bounce back as close as possible to being in line with your ear, or being in vertical space in line with what you perceive sound with, so that it wouldn't necessarily hit just you, but also anybody beside you would get a similar effect. So in some ways, using the windshield as a reflector will enable a wider sound field that you could perceive as being wider in your seat, and also a wider position that would perceive a correct sound. So if you're building a center build, or a two-seat build as they call it in the SQ world, and that's where the judge will judge from one seat and the other seat also, or two different judges will judge each from a different seat. And you have to build a tune that sounds, on the money and hot and pretty in both positions. It's much more difficult than building a one seat or a single seat tune. But that reflected tweeter might work well in a situation like that, because it's going to give you a good vertical control, because you're bouncing it off of the window. The horizontal is just going to go out, but the vertical control would be there, and that's all you're really wanting to do in a two-seat tune. But it all depends on the angles. So if your window is, say, angled this way, you might have your tweeter angled more toward the back, whereas if your windshield is more vertical, you may have the tweeter angled more up. And then, of course, because ultimately you're wanting that sound to like an eight ball, bounce off the bumper and come right back and hit your ear. And if your ear is right here, you want the sound to go bonk, bonk. And if your windshield's tilted like this and your speaker's right here, your sound's going to go bonk and come down here, and you're going to be getting some weird stuff going on up here. So it all depends on the angles of everything. I guess there's a way to make any windshield work. It's all about where you place the tweeter and how you position it. So I don't know. I'm off on a tangent, but that's exactly how my brain operates. Guys, I live this every day. My brain does these things, and I just sit there and turn it over in my head until I start making connections. It's a really, I don't know. It keeps my brain busy, I'll tell you that. But I did find it interesting, and I hope you guys also found it interesting. And if you did find that interesting, comment. Please leave me some comments. Let's talk about this. What are your experiences with running windshield reflected tweeters or windshield reflected mids? Because they're going to behave in a similar fashion. Um, the factories, whenever they put in stereo systems, oftentimes they have the primary high driver, whether it be a small mid or a tweeter or both, in the dash, sunk down in the dash some, and they're playing up into the windshield and getting reflected. That's a common position for speakers, and those dash speakers have a certain sound to them. And it may be that the sound is inaccurate and wrong, but at the same time, you may be used to wrong. Wrong may be what your norm is, and so you want to hear that distortion. It's pleasant to you. It's like a lot of guys want speakers in the back of their vehicle. They feel like they need to have sound back there, production, because they grew up in cars where rear speakers were, quite frankly, the primary source of all of the real sound, because you had that big back deck back there and basically an infinite baffle in the trunk, and you mount some big old 6x9s back there, and 75% of the sound in the car came from the back, and only a small, you turn that way back there and just barely bring the front speakers in because they were right in your face. And they weren't producing no real bass, so that's the sound field that a lot of us old guys grew up with. And in a modern car, you can do a lot more because now you've got a sub which can give you sound everywhere, and it's a whole different world. But and it isn't that it's correct; it's that it's what you're used to. It is what it is, right? Uh, anyway, if you like my craziness and my rambling and my brain that runs, just hit the subscribe button and comment down below. Let's talk about it. Peace, guys.